pleasure to be here, and so happy birthday, I guess, is that the way to say it? And congratulations on everything you've achieved over the last 10 years. I'm honored to be here. This is a sector and a topic which is incredibly close to my heart and really my life's work. So maybe I'll start by just telling you a little bit about me and my firm and what I've been doing for the last 10 or 20 years. And then I think you asked me to talk a little bit about where we see spin-outs more broadly in the UK and how that sits in a international context and where things are going, and we're making great progress, and some of the things we can do to go forwards from that. So, but a little bit about me first of all. So as Lisa said, I run a firm called Cambridge Innovation Capital. So we are a venture capital firm based in Cambridge, UK. I have to say UK because we have a lot of international investors. We have been going for about 12 years, so roughly similar to sort of the ICURe duration. Over that 12 years, we've raised about $1 billion. I switched to dollars because it rounds up nicely. We have invested in about 100 companies in the Cambridge region. About half of those are spin-outs from the University of Cambridge or other universities in the region. And then the other half are spin-outs from university-like IP-generating institutions. So the MRC Lab of Molecular Biology, the Sanger Genomics Institute. We're very lucky in Cambridge to have a number of engineering consultancies like TTP, Sigentia, so we invest in all of that output. And we've had a fabulous time over the last 10 years, and everything is up and to the right. I can genuinely say, other than a little bit of noise around COVID, the amount of deal flow we see, so the number of investment opportunities, the number of repeat entrepreneurs that we have the opportunity to back, the amount of capital that we see coming in to the whole country and into our region to co-invest alongside us, everything is growing. So this is basically a good news story. And I'll give you a few stats around that in a minute. How did I get to being managing partner of Cambridge Innovation Capital? Well, basically, I went on a very similar journey to, I think, a lot of people in this room. So I was an undergraduate studying physics, and then I did a PhD. My father was a professor of material science, so I just sort of went along that career trajectory, not really knowing, not really paying too much attention, actually, for quite a while. This is in the 90s, and so if you graduated with a PhD in materials physics in the 90s in Cambridge, and you were sort of commercially interested, quite ambitious, there were not actually a lot of opportunities, nothing like there is today. I didn't know what a startup was. There was no ICURe, there were no accelerators, there was no entrepreneur first, there were no VC firms, and if there were, I wouldn't know what one of them was. So I went straight to the States. I went to the Bay Area for 2 years, but ended up staying for 20 years. So I ran a research group at Berkeley Lab for a number of years. So I was a PI, like I think a number of you in this room, running research funded mostly by Department of Energy, by NSF, by DARPA, so broadly similar to what's going on here. And then I started to get the entrepreneurial bug. When you sit in the Bay Area for too long, every dinner party you go to, every parent you meet at a soccer game or football game or in the playground is working in tech, is working in entrepreneurship, is creating startups, and you get sucked into that bug. Very much in the way that we're starting to see in Cambridge now as well. So I did an executive MBA at Berkeley, which was perhaps the best thing I ever did. That taught me the fundamentals of business and finance and startups. And then started a couple of businesses. So my first one was a company called Shape Memory Materials. So this was using shape memory alloys for making medical devices for treating ischemic stroke. And it was a classic sort of, I was the researcher who'd done an MBA, who had a mate who'd discovered this technology, and we wrote the business plan together without the help of anything like ICURe, and made all of the rookie mistakes that we made, that you typically make in terms of underestimating pretty much everything that was required to be done. The business is still alive, but it's sort of bumping along a little bit. My co-founder is still running it. I moved on and ended up starting another business called Navitas Semiconductor. So this is in the gallium nitride power electronics space. That one went a lot better and actually listed on the NASDAQ about 3 years ago for about $1.5 billion. So I have genuinely done the sort of 0 to $1 billion scale up on my second startup, and can share lots of war stories about Navitas, which continues to give me a lot of joy. I then moved into the investment world, and so I spent about 10 years working in what we would now call deep tech venture capital. At the time, it was called energy and industrials and materials in San Francisco. And then I joined a firm called True North in Chicago, where I also led this sort of the deep tech team. And then the only job I've ever had back home in the UK is CIC, and I moved back to initially run the deep tech team at CIC, and then I took over as managing partner about 6 or 7 years ago. So it's been quite a journey, and I've had the opportunity to see things on both sides of the Atlantic from the perspective of an academic, the perspective of a founder, and now for the last quite a few years from the perspective of an investor. That's given me the opportunity to work a little bit in policy. So I have chaired the Venture Capital Committee for what's called the British Venture Capital Association. So that's the trade body here for a number of years. So when the previous government, now the current government, wants to talk to the venture industry about policy and how it affects, creating more spin-outs or more scale-ups, they come and talk to us. So I've had an opportunity to interact with government quite a lot over the last few years. And I'd say that's been a broadly positive experience. Lisa mentioned a little bit about sort of the change of government and what's likely to happen. We were just chatting about this before. What I would say at a high level is it's sort of a bit of a duh in the sense that all you are working on in terms of science and technology-driven innovation leading to economic growth is not something that this country has always got as a policy perspective. I think it's something that's been understood in the US ever since the Second World War, but is certainly well understood now and probably has been for the last 20 years. So you are the economic engine, you're the darlings of number 10 and number 11 in the last administration and in this current administration. So it's a really exciting time to be in that space. I had a really interesting experience about 18 months ago. I was asked by Jeremy Hunt, when he was Chancellor, to take a look holistically at the spin-out ecosystem in the UK, along with Irene Tracy, who's the Vice Chancellor of Oxford, and look at that time there was some friction in the ecosystem. There was some rather negative headlines on the front pages of the FT around founders suing, in that case, Oxford University, because of the terms that they had that they weren't happy with on their spin-out. There was lots of grumpiness about equity splits that everyone likes to talk so much about. And so we, I think, did a pretty comprehensive job of taking a look at the state of play back in sort of 2023, which is, as always, the glass was sort of 3/4 full in my opinion, but there were some sort of common sense best practices that could be shared across the country. And so we published a number of recommendations, all of which were accepted by the government. And I'll give you an update in a second, but many of those are now being implemented, and so I'm delighted to see that as well. So that's a bit about me. So spin-outs and strategic importance. So I pulled some stats, and I'm sure there are tons of stats, and you all can read lots and lots of different reports. As a Cambridge man, I always gravitate to Thomas Ulrichsen's work, which is absolutely fantastic. So he runs something called he sits in the policy unit at the university looking at commercialization and innovation. But you could also look at the Royal Academy of Engineering, for example. They have great reports. So how important are spin-outs? Well, in the sectors, these what I would call the industries of the 21st century. So we call them life sciences and deep tech, and that obviously includes AI and quantum and series and advanced therapeutics and medical devices. The stats that I have over, say, the last 5 years, of the top biotech startups, and we do a lot of those, 60% were university spin-outs. Of the top medical device startups that are backing and growing, about 50% were university spin-outs. Even in the semiconductor industry, which has been pretty moribund in this country for a generation, 30% of some of the most attractive and high-growth companies are university spin-outs. So across all of those sectors, that is where the engine of innovation is. And if you take a step back and think about it, it's, again, not surprising. If you contrast with the US, when I first went out there, I was interviewing at Bell Labs. I did a lot of work at Hughes Research Lab, at SRI. All these national research labs, corporate research labs, are engines of innovations that sit alongside their universities. We don't really have anywhere near the level of corporate R&D and that type of innovation in this country. We don't really have as many national labs doing fundamental science. What we do have are some of the greatest research universities in the world. And that is the engine of growth here. That's where the best minds are, the best ideas, increasingly the most entrepreneurial and passionate people are. So it's not a surprise that spin-outs are making such a large chunk of the most exciting growth companies here. And so, well done, basically. I don't see any reason, I just see that's going to continue to grow. So a few other stats I was asked to look at. So what is what do we think about what is the market that we're working in? So it's about 200 spin-outs a year are what we're tracking, which I guess is broadly similar to the data that Innovate UK is seeing. And we see an active base of about 2,000 science and technology spin-outs that have had a certain level of investment and are looking to grow. That's a pretty large number of companies. And when you look at, if you switch into now my investment lens, the opportunity for investment in UK spin-outs and scale-ups is now into the billions of pounds a year. The last stats I looked at is there was about 20 billion pounds of venture investment into the UK in the last year, and about half of that was going into the sectors that I just talked about: deep tech, life sciences, AI, quantum, semi. That's about 10 billion pounds. That is a massive growth. If you look at the deep tech numbers, for example, which is my sector, that's a 5x in the last 5 years. So there's a huge amount of capital coming in and growing this ecosystem. Are we any good at this? Well, the good news is actually we're really good at this, and we're good at this and we're getting better, and we're good at this on an international scale. So, when I did the spin-out review, I found it a bit depressing about the sort of the Britishness of the doom and gloom and the navel gazing around. No, we could do this better. No, we can do that. But if you look at the stats in terms of the number of spin-outs per R&D investment in our universities, it's about 1 for every 50 million. That is broadly equivalent to the US. If you look at the number of spin-outs per patent or any of those kind of stats, broadly equivalent to the US. If you look at the amount of investment in those spin-outs, particularly in the active clusters, so in the Golden Triangle here in the UK, that is broadly equivalent to the active clusters in the US, which is the Bay Area and Boston, the most commercially active. So I think there's often a lot of sort of concern that we're not keeping up with the US. Obviously, the absolute stats are higher there, but what I can say without a shadow of a doubt, having spent time at Berkeley, having invested in spin-outs from Stanford and MIT and Caltech and USC and Columbia and numerous other universities in the US, the quality of the research here is every bit as good, and in many cases, in many sectors, is a lot better. So that's a lot on stats and research, but I think what I've learned more than anything doing this for the last 20 or 30 years is that in some sense the money and the IP and the ideas and the infrastructure, that's sort of all table stakes. What really makes this sector, what really makes the startups and the spin-outs thrive is people. It's all about people. And the thing that I think has changed the most through the time of my career, particularly here in the UK, is the level of embracing of entrepreneurship with it throughout our culture, but particularly within our academic community. I said, when I graduated in the 90s, there was no thought of doing a startup. My father was a professor at that time, and he thought that commercialization was a little bit tawdry actually, and it sort of tainted the purity of fundamental research. And you shouldn't really be mixing that with hardcore publications. It couldn't be more different today, right? So, when I walk out into the street in Cambridge and I see, all of the undergraduates and graduate students sort of thriving around, and you sort of listen to what they're talking about in the coffee shops and the burger vans, it's all about startups. If you go into the computer lab and you look at the companies that are exhibiting on graduation day of come and work for us, right? Back in my day, it was Goldman Sachs, it was Credit Suisse, if you can go and do financial engineering, basically. Those were the most attractive careers. Nobody wants to work for Goldman anymore. Everyone wants to work for the startups that we're backing, or maybe some of the big tech companies that have come into the ecosystem and acquired some of the startups they're working in and still have that entrepreneurial culture. So the thing that makes me most excited going forward is all of you and the embracing of this spin-out ecosystem. And I think programs, particularly like ICURe, that demystify a little bit of what that journey involves, make it just a little bit less scary. It's still pretty scary, right, to give up a guaranteed tenured position, or to give up a more stable job in a large company to go and take that leap and do a startup. But if you can make it a little bit less scary and you can increase the probability of success a bit through ICURe and programs like it, I think that massively moves the needle. The other thing that we've seen on sort of the human talent side of things over the last 5 to 10 years is the concept of serial and repeat entrepreneurs. So I think one of the sort of superpowers of my peers in particularly the Bay Area, those venture firms, the brand name venture firms that you've all heard about, the Andreessens, the Kleiners, the Sequoias of this world, is they don't actually take that much risk a lot of the time, because they back the same people to create the same business for the 4th time. They just come back with, oh, I've got a slightly different molecule going after a slightly different target, or I've got the next generation of that algorithm, or I've got the next version of that chip. That massively de-risks the investments from the investor's perspective, but also from the entrepreneur's perspective. And we're seeing that now, right? So when CIC was set up 10 years ago, 100% of our investments were in first-time entrepreneurs. These days, more than half are on their 2nd or 3rd business. And it's culturally acceptable to come back and go for broke on your 2nd business. If you have a failure like I did on your 1st business, and you have a success on your 2nd, and you want to go for a massive success on your 3rd business. That's the culture that we're seeing now. And we're seeing those folks give back, and mentoring in ICURe, and mentoring throughout our portfolio, and sharing their expertise. So I think that the maturation and the growth of ambition of the human capital massively outweighs what is still a pretty good story in terms of the growth of the investment capital. I was asked just to finish with a few thoughts on the spin-out review, and it's a little over a year since we published those recommendations, and Research England, so I don't think Jessica's here, have they, but have been working very hard to implement all of the recommendations, actually, that Irene and I put in that report. And I'm delighted with the rate of progress. I can see some faces here who came to a 10U event that we did just before the holidays, where we talked about some of this. But just to recap some of this for you. So we did start with a series of recommendations looking on spin-out terms and equity splits, and what was market for a series of different types of businesses, whether they're IP-rich on the life sciences or IP-light on the software side. And we partnered with 10U, and I know there's a number of 10U folks here, to publish what's called the UCIT guides, which is a sort of set of standardized templates for how to think about a spin-out, all the terms that are involved in it, and what are some sort of sensible ranges that have historically worked for other businesses, both for the investors, for the founders, for the universities. Those UCIT guides have been published. They're being widely adopted, and I think 10U has done just an amazing job on that. We also identified proof of concept funding as one of the key gaps in sort of the product offering in the ecosystem. So I called around something like 50 to 100 universities as part of doing the review. And my last question, as you could imagine, was always is there anything I haven't asked? If there's one thing you could have, if there's one thing you need that would increase the quality and quantity of spin-outs from your institution, what would it be? And I expected that I would get sort of 100 answers from 100 interviews, but I only got one answer, which was, we need more proof of concept funding, because we get too many businesses that are stuck at that point where academic fundamental research funding from UKRI is running out, but they're not yet de-risked to the point where investors like me can say, well, yeah, I can see exactly where that's going to go and what the trajectory is going to be and what we need. So they just need a little bit of bridging funding. And so I was delighted just last week that we had recommended UKRI set up a new proof of concept funding pool of capital. That has been launched. I think applications can happen on the UKRI website. Yeah, you're nodding, yes. It's not a lot of money yet, but we're told that if they get a lot of good applications, there could be more money there. So we're delighted to see that. And the last I heard was, when you look at all the recommendations as a whole, I think 50 universities, including all of the Russell Group universities, have now accepted those set of recommendations. So we have sort of a level playing field across the country in terms of the processes and procedures and terms in which we're creating all of these spin-outs, which I think just simplifies the world for everyone and makes it really easy for myself and our peers around the country to do more deals and to raise more capital internationally and invest them in your businesses, which is what I think all of us want to see. So maybe that's a good point to leave it, but thank you very much for this.